All right, Josh. So you said you were going to do a top 10. I wrote a top 10 down. Let's take a stab at it with the caveat for all y'all that are listening on Sunday and USC lost. Josh has got USC in his top 10. Um, so that could kind of throw things a little bit sideways. But y'all, we got to get these done. We can't record again on Sunday, a top 10 Sunday morning, and then record Sunday night. Our wives would kill us. That's way too much. So we're going to do a top 10 now. We're going to get it out Sunday morning. There's the caveat. Josh first. I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I can. And I will say Oklahoma basically just sealed their loss now. Kansas State sealed the win for them. But yeah, I'll go forward and do my top 10. Do you want me to start number 1 or number 10?
Go number 1.
So my number 1 remains Georgia. I think Georgia's performance today wasn't great, but as we talked about, it was just one of those games where they got on the wrong side of the turnover chain. We're -4, I think, in turnovers in the first half, but they still put up 39 points. I have a little bit of concern from that 22 points scored and how it was scored, because Kent State did move the ball legitimately on Georgia, and you saw some chinks in the armor, some places where they haven't completely reloaded, I think, as well. And I think those will get fleshed out a little more in SEC play, and you'll start to see that they do have some areas where they can be attacked, but they're still the most complete team. Offensively, they have the best rhythm of anyone in the country. They need A.D. Mitchell back from injury, I think, a little bit, but otherwise, I think they're still the most well-rounded team. My number 2 is Ohio State. Took a big step forward against Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin's a team where they have a lot of matchup advantages. We talked about that in our preview where, I picked Ohio State to win by a pretty significant margin, but they were dominant, and their defense is starting to really show up, and they had a lot of plays behind the line of scrimmage. They were really dominating physically on that side of the ball, and then offensively, they're completely in rhythm. My number 3 is Alabama, kind of in the same boat. Those two teams, Ohio State and Alabama, are closing the gap fast, I think, with Georgia in terms of overall quality. There was a big gap 2 weeks ago, and I don't think there is now. Alabama was playing a bad Vandy team, not nearly as bad as they have been. They're actually somewhat decent, but still bad, but they were just completely in rhythm. And in a way, even they weren't, we talked about the opening week of Utah State. It's a big jump from Utah State to this year's Vandy. And they looked better today than they looked then, from at least the part that I got to watch. And defensively, I think they're probably the best defensive unit in the country. Nobody's really done much of anything other than one quarter of scripted plays from Texas, throwing to 5 stars with a 5-star quarterback, and we don't really know what that means yet. My number 4 is Michigan. And Michigan is one of the harder teams to evaluate, I think, because they did not play a P5 out of conference. I think they were a little bit shell-shocked in that Maryland game. I was very concerned with how the defensive and offensive lines really didn't get a lot of push or didn't get a lot of disruption. At times, Talia Tagovailoa had an eternity to throw from Maryland. And yeah, they got beat somewhat in the secondary. They struggled with explosive plays. All that's sort of bad, but the core pieces are what alarm me the most. I will say J.J. McCarthy did not look good. I don't know if that's a one-off or that's who he is, but if that is who he is, their number 4 ranking is going to be in question. However, I say that knowing the rest of my list isn't going to be that pretty. My number 5 is Clemson. I think Clemson, again, another team that has a lot of chinks in the armor. I thought their defense, when their front got to the quarterback, looked really good. And when they didn't, they looked surprisingly average on the back end. I don't think they're particularly good on the back end of that defense. Offensively, you can see all the same inconsistencies we've been seeing for a while. Wake Forest is a bad defense, and they still didn't score a ton. So I kind of have Clemson there sort of kind of by default, mainly due to the strength of that defense. And I will say, if they get better quarterback play, Clemson is the one that could, I think, improve the most in terms of quality and could easily charge, really the one team I think that can challenge the top 3. But that's a big if, and that also depends upon the defense showing up. My number, where are we on now? Number 6 is Baylor. Baylor gutted out a tough win against a pretty good Iowa State team, not a great one. I think they have some flaws, but they're a solid team. And at this point, you're going to start seeing pretty quickly the pickings get pretty slim. I don't love everything I see from them. I think defensively, they get pushed around a lot more than they did last year. Offensively, they still have some ability to put more pop out there than I think maybe the brand necessarily gets credit for. I think they're just a pretty solid all-around team. I'm not sure that I'm sold that Baylor's going to stay in that slot. Now I'm sort of second guessing myself because I think I put the wrong team at number 6. I don't know. We'll see. Baylor with their loss probably shouldn't be there. I completely forgot that they lost to LSU. That's what happens when you record live. My number 7 is Tennessee. I'm going to throw in another number 6 here in a minute once I second guess what I was doing because I just remember they lost that game. Tennessee, I thought, showed their explosiveness on offense. I think their defense has as many sort of warts as they did last year. I think they can be run on. Obviously, they can be run on. I think they probably can be thrown on a lot more by a team that's better than Florida, and Florida did throw the ball on them pretty successfully with a bad quarterback. But offensively, they were one of the better teams in the country. They're one of the few teams that hasn't lost a game. Hard to have them any lower. USC, I have at number 8. Consider it by default because I don't know what's going to happen tonight, and I think their potential on the offensive side of the ball is such that it keeps them in that top 10. Assuming they win, they're going to be up there with anybody else. I think Oregon State's a pretty good team, so there's not a huge shame in the fact that they're not blowing them out immediately. My number 9 is Kentucky, and this is where you start to really get into by default. They did not look great today, but they do have, something of a pretty decent resume. That win over Florida means something. I think they're a pretty good all-around team. They have a pretty good defense. They've got a quarterback that is capable of playing at a high level, though I think he's more inconsistent than people give him credit for. And my number 10 is NC State. NC State is, I think, just sort of quietly sitting there under the radar. There are a lot of people that had NC State as being one of the better teams in the country and a dark horse playoff contender early in the season. I didn't see it to start the year. I'm seeing it a little more now. So with NC State, sort of being where they are, yeah, I think it makes sense for them to be number 10. And I'm sort of scouring, knowing that I kind of messed up with Baylor. I guess Oklahoma State is probably the team I should have slotted in there.
I was going to give you, I was going to tell you Oklahoma State because that's who I have at number 6, by the way, from the Big 12 is Oklahoma State. And I think that that's probably the better fit. Before I get into mine, I got a question for you. And this isn't fair. This is kind of a gotcha. But if Michigan played Tennessee today, who wins that game?
If Michigan played Tennessee today, do you mean like if they played right now, or if you mean if they played like they played today?
No. If those two teams played on a neutral site today, who are you picking to win that game?
If they were to play next week, I think if I were to set the odds, I would set the odds in Michigan's favor, not by a ton, probably like by -6 or something. If they played like they played today, Tennessee would have beaten Michigan.
Yeah. So I think that, and here's the thing, and this is, and my first 3, Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, those are my first 3. I'll blow through them pretty quickly. Ohio State was super dominant. I really like what you said about how Ohio State and Alabama are closing the gap on Georgia. And I think that's the perfect way to put it. I think we almost have a 1A, B, and C. The thing that was most impressive about Alabama today, and to an extent the same with Ohio State, is not the offense, it's the defense. Vanderbilt is not a good football team, but they scored 25 legitimate points on Wake Forest. They scored 63 on Hawaii. Like, they've been and if you watch the tape schematically, they're a very interesting offense. Alabama held them to 3 points. That was impressive to me. I thought Alabama would beat them 66-17 kind of thing. 3 points. That was impressive. Anyway, those are the 3 teams that are going to sort it out in the playoffs. So whatever. Number 4, I've got Tennessee, and I don't have a lot of confidence about this pick, but Tennessee has a win against a pretty good Pitt team and a win against a Florida team who I think figured a lot of things out offensively today. And yes, Florida put on some late, like, dramatic touchdowns or whatever when Tennessee was trying to salt it away, running the ball up the middle. But Tennessee won that game, and I think it was a lot it wasn't nearly as close as the final score indicates. I think they would have beaten Michigan if they played today. And part of that is because at this point in the year, based on how Michigan played against Maryland, we're giving Michigan a whole lot of credit going into week 5 based on what they did last year. That's the only way I can put it at this point. Because we can't judge them on their first 3 games, because what they did is no better than what a lot of bad Power 5 teams could do against that schedule. The one game we have to judge them against, there were some real issues and some concerns I have, especially at quarterback. But I still think that they have a pretty good roster. So I got Tennessee 4, Michigan number 5. I've got Oklahoma State number 6. I like Sanders a lot at quarterback. They beat this Central Michigan team worse than Penn State beat them today. Yes, Central Michigan scored 44. It was like 50-17 or something when the scrubs went in. Now, I think that speaks to depth on Oklahoma State's side, but that wasn't a legitimate 44 points. Oklahoma State, to me, is the team that's probably the best team in the Big 12, and I think that they deserve that number 6 slot. Like you with Kentucky, it's real shaky. I've got them at number 7. I don't love putting them here. I think that, what they did defensively against Florida was probably more impressive than we gave them credit for, but offensively, I don't love them, man. 31 today against Northern Illinois, 8-point win, I think it was, which is also not great for a top 10 team. But again, who else are you going to put in there? Because resume counts too. I've got Clemson down at number 8. I don't like, the thing for me is I'm not wild about their offense, but I also like the thing that had them up high for me was that defense. And I do not like their defense anymore, given what they did against Wake Forest today. And look, Wake Forest has got a good offense, but they're scoring about the same against Clemson as they did against Vanderbilt. Come on. That's not good, because Vanderbilt's defense, we saw it today against Alabama, is trash. So I've got some concerns with Clemson, but I agree with you in that they've got the roster of all the teams in the top 10 that could make the jump up to the top 4. Penn State is my number 9. I think they've earned it. I think they earned it with that win at Auburn, even though I think Auburn is a bad team. Going on the road, beating them as bad as they did is impressive. And I've actually got Minnesota at number 10. I'm impressed with what they did today on the road at Michigan State. I do not think Michigan State is a good team, but again, the ability to dominate bad teams, especially on the road, which Penn State and Minnesota have done, is something that at this point in the year deserves credit. Anybody else in this top 10, in my opinion, is based on making a lot of assumptions about who they can be or their brand name, and I don't want to do that yet. So that's my top 10, and USC might end up blowing out Oregon State, but right now it's 3-7 at the half, and they look pretty bad. So maybe they'll jump back in there next week, but this is who I've got right now. Josh, tell me, who's the team outside of your top 10 that could still make a lot of noise this year?
Gosh. And I will say, I wanted to note there were a lot of people laughing about Tennessee for you, number 4. But I'd make the point, like you said, I mean, the way they played today, Tennessee would have beaten Michigan, and they would have beaten Clemson too. So outside the top 4, as I watch Kansas State recover the onside kick, it's NC State, I think. Well, I guess they're in my top 10. Outside my top 10, or outside your top 10, or
outside of your top 10, who could you see making some noise? Is it Baylor? Since you've removed them, you've jettisoned them from your top 10 during this discussion.
Yeah, I got them. Oklahoma State didn't play this week, and I got them temporarily mixed up, especially since they just played Iowa State tough in my head as I was ranking them out. Gosh. The one team I think that really isn't on a lot of radars is probably Ole Miss right now, which is kind of interesting. They're floating out there. They destroyed Georgia Tech. They kind of had a tough opener with Troy, but they still pulled away from them. And then this Tulsa game ended up being pretty close, but Tulsa is actually a decent team this year. I don't know if maybe that's maybe that's the answer to it. Oklahoma's one that just went down. That's not a bad team just because they had this loss. Though maybe this sort of points to the fact that Kansas State has been annoying. I think the truth of the matter is you could point to about a dozen teams outside of these top 10s that are capable of beating teams in the top 10s. Like I think Penn State and Minnesota are certainly capable of being in the top 10 in 2 weeks. I don't know what my top 10 is going to look like. I think it's going to be extremely variable throughout the entire year.
Can I give you one, Josh, that maybe we should think about?
Sure. Yeah.
Utah.
See, I don't know. I'm not as sold on Utah. I think they're a good team. I think they lost a game against Florida that they probably shouldn't have lost. But I don't know. I think they've got some faults. I don't think the passing game is great. I think they're kind of a one-dimensional team, and they're going to look really good against the teams they look good against. And then they're going to be certain teams where they look just completely flat. And it's going to depend so much on matchups and so much on how much you can lean on Cam Rising and his ability to run the ball at a quarterback position. I think they're a lot like Florida, honestly, that both those teams kind of are going to be totally boom or bust on whether or not what they want to do with their quarterback works, because they're kind of unique pieces. And when it doesn't work on the other side of the ball, they both kind of have some holes and limitations, I think, that can get them in a position where they can lose to a lot of people. But they can certainly beat a lot of people too.
Yeah, it's tough for me because I think that we overreact with week 1 games, but they're about to go up 21-0 on Arizona with 9 minutes left in the first or second quarter. So I'm kind of impressed by that. It's also on the road. Again, Arizona State's not a good football team, but this year, like, I think this is going to be a theme. There's the parity thing that we've wanted for a while, I feel like, is here outside of the top couple of teams. There's a lot of fun to be had in watching games of the 15th best team to the 50th best team. I think there's a lot of fun there that people aren't paying attention to. And I do think that Florida State has the opportunity to make a little bit of noise this year.